When I say the word power, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For a lot of us, it's, corruption, control, maybe even abuse. But what if I told you that's a huge misunderstanding? What if power is actually a really essential and maybe even a positive force in our lives? Today, we're going to unpack a completely new framework for understanding influence, all based on the book The Orders of Power. And trust me, it might just change how you see everything.
So let's just get right to it. Is power always a bad thing? We've all heard the old saying, power corrupts, right? But the source material for this explainer asks us to kind of push back on that idea. It suggests that power itself is neutral, almost like an electrical current. It's not good or bad. What really matters is how we decide to use it.
And why is this so important? Well, because our current kind of broken view of power has some massive consequences. Get this. According to research cited in the book, a staggering 70% of an executive's time is just wasted. Wasted on office politics and infighting. That is time that could be going into innovation, into solving real problems, and it's just gone. It's pretty clear we desperately need a better way to think about this.
Okay, so let's get to the absolute heart of this new idea. The book introduces these things called orders of power, and the very first one completely reframes the entire concept. The big idea here is that power isn't about control at all. It's about needs.
This right here is the core of the whole thing. Power isn't about force. It's not about your spot in the hierarchy. It is simply the dynamic ability to attend to the needs of another. Just let that sink in for a second. Power isn't something you own. It's something that flows between people. It all depends on who needs what and who can give it to them. That makes power, at its heart, completely relational. Let's make this real with a super simple analogy from the book. Okay. Picture a really successful, super influential lawyer. But right now, that lawyer has an excruciating toothache, so they go to the dentist. In that specific moment, who has all the power? The dentist, of course. The lawyer desperately needs something that only the dentist can provide, getting them out of pain. Okay, now let's fast forward a week. That same dentist gets tangled up in some legal trouble and has to call that lawyer for advice. Boom. All of a sudden, the power completely flips. Now the dentist has a need that only the lawyer can fill. See? It's not static. Power just moves to whoever can solve the most urgent need in the room at any given time. So building on that core idea of needs, the book lays out a few other orders that really build out this full framework for influence. Let's dive into 3 more of these key principles. So these principles are responsibility, which is basically power's other half. Then there's evolve, this unbreakable rule that you have to adapt to what people need or you'll just disappear. And finally, cohesion, which is this fascinating look at how small, really united groups can end up with a ton of power. All right, let's start with the second order, responsibility. The book makes this great point that power and responsibility are really just 2 sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other. Any kind of sustainable power demands accountability. If you're trying to have influence but you're not answering for the consequences, you don't have real power. You just have this fragile control that's pretty much guaranteed to fall apart. And this brings us to the 4th order, evolve. Or maybe more accurately, evolve or perish. I mean, think about Kodak. They literally invented the first digital camera way back in '75, but they were afraid of it and just shelved it. Or Blockbuster, who famously had the chance to buy Netflix and just said, nah. In both of these cases, power wasn't stolen from them. They lost it. They gave it away because they stopped meeting the changing needs of their customers. Now, this quote here perfectly explains the 5th order, cohesion. It gets at this question of why a small, inflexible group so often gets what it wants. Well, the answer is simple. A committed group that has a really strict need, like only eating kosher food, will almost always win out over a big, flexible majority. Why? Because for an airline, it's just easier to make all the snacks kosher than to deal with 2 separate inventories. It shows how a small, cohesive, and really motivated group can have way more power than a huge, disorganized one. So, how does all this stuff about orders of power actually show up in the real world? The book argues that all of our groups, our companies, our teams, they all run on one of 2 basic systems, fear or trust. And the choice between those 2, well, it changes absolutely everything. On one side, you have the fear-based system. Think of the old-school lord-slave dynamic. It runs on coercion, control, and secrecy, and it just crushes productivity. But on the other side, you've got the trust-based system. This is built on partnership, autonomy, and transparency. And this is where innovation really thrives. The first system is all about just surviving. The second one is about flourish. And the difference here isn't just, some philosophical feel-good idea. It is measurable. Shifting from a system that runs on fear to one that runs on trust can actually boost productivity by over 200%. It makes sense, right? When people feel trusted, they stop holding back. They bring all their creativity and energy to the table because they're not afraid of being punished for taking a smart risk. So, what does this all mean for you? Well, here's the most powerful part. You are not just some passive observer in these systems. You actually have the power to influence them. You can build trust, and you can change the dynamics in your own life and at your own job. So how do we actually do this? The book talks about a strategy from game theory called generous tit for tat. And it sounds complicated, but it's actually really simple. First, just start by cooperating. Assume the best and act with trust. Now, when someone makes a mistake, because people will make mistakes, forgive them sometimes. This is what breaks those downward spirals of retaliation. Then be transparent when you mess up. It builds an incredible amount of trust. And finally, always bring the focus back to your shared goals. So the last question is really for you. Think about your own workplace, your team, maybe even some of your personal relationships. Can you spot the signs of a fear-based system in action? A place where people are holding back, where they're scared to fail? And what's just one small step, one single act of trust or transparency that you could take to start shifting that dynamic? In the end, this is really what it all boils down to. Power isn't about your ego, it's not about control, and it's not about winning. In its highest form, the ultimate purpose of power is to serve life, to create the kind of conditions where people and systems can actually thrive and learn and evolve. It's a tool not for domination, but for creation. And that is a power we can all learn how to use.